We are experiencing some outer planet ingresses this year that mark the start of a new era. Neptune, the planet of dreams, illusion, and confusion, spends around 14 years in one sign. Today, it enters the sign of the pioneer, the warrior, the leader in Aries. The last time Neptune was in Aries was from 1861 to 1875, when we saw the American Civil War, the abolition of slavery in America, the invention of dynamite, the Homestead Act, and completion of the first transcontinental railroad. The art of astrological prediction requires looking to the past in order to look to our future. However, I would like to give an important disclaimer that transits don't exist in isolation. While we might see similar themes pop up, there were still some completely different transits happening at the time. For example, unlike today, Saturn was nowhere near Aries during the last Neptune and Aries transit. Regardless of how it all plays out, I believe we will see a new vision of cultural identity emerge. The 1860s and 70s was a period that significantly shaped the image of the United States, for better or worse. To this day, you still see people who clutch onto some sort of cultural identity from this period. People still fly flags of the side that lost the Civil War. A whole genre of music often harkens back to this period. People still live vicariously in this era through theme parks. And we have an entire film and book genre dedicated to the American Wild West. And when you think of Wild West films, what is a cliché scene that comes to mind? The Wild West standoff wasn't only a movie cliché, but something that happened in real life in the American Wild West. And the very first documented Wild West shootout happened in none other than my hometown of Springfield, Missouri, between the notorious Wild Bill Hickok and Davis Tutt on July 21st, 1865. Many gunslingers of the Wild West made their name during the Neptune and Aries period, and their images went on to be romanticized and serialized in real time. So, who was Wild Bill Hickok, and how did he rise to fame during the last transit of Neptune through Aries? James Butler Hickok was born on May 27, 1837, in Troy Grove, Illinois. In his adulthood, he left his home and family, traveling west with his brother to acquire land and make a name for himself. However, in his endeavors, Hickok left two distinctly polarizing legacies. For some, he was a much admired man known for his loyalty and steadfast friendship. And to others, he was viewed as a liar, a cheat, and a bully. Regardless, he certainly made a name for himself, just as he set out to do. Before we jump into his chart, here's a disclaimer. For many historical figures who weren't born into royalty, birth times can be iffy. We know Wild Bill's birthday, but not his birth time, which gives this chart an X Rodin rating. However, it is my personal opinion that even with an iffy birth time, you can still get a decent dialogue on what's happening between the planets. Now, since we don't know the time of birth for Mr. James Butler Hickok, we don't know his rising sign and thus his chart ruler. However, what we do get to know is his final dispositor, which is like the final boss of a chart. While the helmsman, aka the chart ruler, is the person steering the ship of our natal charts, the final dispositor would be the person that the helmsman works for. Hickok's final dispositor is his very well-placed Mercury in Gemini. However, it is retrograde. This really slows down his highly curious nature and turns it inward. He likely struggled with communication and/or learning. And he was definitely a thinker, but likely struggled with thinking on his feet and needed a good amount of time for reflection. We can say for sure he was a Pisces moon, because the moon was in Pisces for the full 24 hours on his day of birth. This tells us he was a highly emotional and intuitive person. It may have been particularly difficult for him to discern his emotional energy from the energy of those around him. What this also means is that his Pisces moon would have been squaring all of his Gemini energy, at least by sign, if not by degree. His chart is highly mutable, which means he was easily changeable and adaptable, even chameleon-like. However, his communicative and curious Gemini nature caused friction with his intuitive Pisces side. I imagine he was someone who easily got wrapped up in his thoughts, maybe even telling himself stories about certain situations based on feelings rather than facts, and based on what he feels is going left unsaid. We see his Sun and Venus are also in Gemini, and forming a trine to Neptune in Aquarius, and squaring Uranus in Pisces. This dynamic leads me to believe that he was a very charming, even a romantic type of person, but also likely a womanizer. With combust Venus, challenging lessons in relationships played a big role in his self-actualization. I think the trine to Neptune in Aquarius and square to Uranus in Pisces indicate the social misunderstandings that could play out when he was lost in the sauce, so to say. However, this dynamic also speaks to the mythos of Wild Bill and how embedded his image was in the culture of the time, especially when it came to storytelling of the Wild West. If I were to pick out anything in this chart to indicate Hickok's role in popular culture, it would be this one. His exploits became the fodder of many books and played a huge role in establishing the Western genre of historical fiction. Let's rewind to 1865. Neptune is in Aries and the Civil War is over. Wild Bill, who previously worked as a Union soldier, spy, and lawman in Springfield, Missouri, found it difficult to find work after the war. He spent much of his free time gambling for money, and Davis K. Tutt was a gambling buddy of his. On the night of July 20th, 1865, the two were playing poker at the Lion House Hotel on South Street. Though they had been friends, Hickok's winning streak grew tensions between the two. Now, there are a few different variations of this historical legend as to the real source of the tension between them. Was it just Hickok's winning streak? Was it lingering tension from mixed loyalties during the Civil War? Was it because they both had romantic intentions for the same woman? Or was it the theory that Wild Bill had a romantic relationship with one of Tutt's sisters? No one really knows, but we'll take a look at the event chart here in a bit and see if there are any indicators. Either way, Tutt was eyeing Hickok's winnings and reminded him that he was still in debt to him from a previous game. Hickok paid, but Tutt continued listing off more alleged debts, which now pissed off Wild Bill Hickok, and he refused to pay. As collateral, Tutt snatched Hickok's prized golden pocket watch, and Wild Bill, who was set on getting it back, warned Tutt that he would kill him if he ever saw him wearing his beloved pocket watch in public. And what do you know? The very next day, Hickok saw Tutt on the square wearing the timepiece. Wild Bill entered the square from South Street, and Tutt came in from Baker Alley in the northwest corner of the square. Both men stopped to face each other, around 75 yards apart. Witnesses claim that Tut was the first to make the draw, but Hickok was the one to make the first shot, and Tut fell dead on the courthouse steps. Hickok faced arrest, and a 3-day-long trial was held, which found him not guilty of manslaughter. Luckily, we know the exact time the shootout happened, and maybe overlaying these transits over Hickok's chart can give us some indicators as to how things really unfolded. So here's the event chart for July 21st, 1865, 6 p.m. in Springfield, Missouri, alongside Hickok's birth chart. Let's break down how these transits could have impacted him on this day. So the sun at this time was at the anaretic 29th degree of Cancer. This is the last degree that a planet can be in before shifting into the next sign. So it's a pivotal moment highlighted with a sense of urgency. The ruler of this sun is the transiting moon in Cancer, which would have formed a square to his natal Pluto in Aries earlier this day. Squares are often where action happens. It's an aspect of tension that asks you to do something about it. The moon squaring his Pluto would have brought immense emotional ruminations on this day, and emotionally charged destructive actions. He was in the mood to burn some bridges at the very least. Earlier in the morning, the transiting moon would have been trine his natal Saturn as well, the planet of time. So it makes sense that a timekeeping device easily played such a role in his destructive mood for the day. We can also see the transiting Mars was in Virgo and applying in a square to his sun in Gemini. This Mars absolutely speaks to the precision of which he was able to shoot. Guns back then honestly did not have the sharpest aim, let alone from such a distance. 75 yards apart. It can be hard to make that shot with a modern gun today, let alone a gun in the 1860s. Mars is that aggressive, penetrating energy, and in the sign of Virgo, it acts out in precise ways. Applying in a square to his sun tells us that he was acting from his wounded ego, and I think this aspect also speaks to how this event impacted his overall identity. Transiting Neptune in Aries was also a player in this dynamic, as it would have been in an exact square with the transiting moon the previous evening. This is the lingering emotional fog from the day prior, and acting from a place of emotional insecurity. One thing to note was that Neptune was separating from a sextile to Hickok's natal Venus. The exact aspect would have happened around mid-April, which means he had opportunities for romantic engagements a few months prior. With these Moon and Venus connections, I think that women-related tensions were really an issue at hand. This theory is further supported by Wild Bill's recent Venus return, as the transiting Venus met up with his natal Venus just a week before the shootout. A planetary return is like a next chapter, a new beginning in a person's life for the themes associated with that planet. In this case, it is very likely that Wild Bill was really focused on love and relationships the week before the shootout. When Venus returned, this also would have activated the dynamics we spoke about earlier regarding his womanizing ways. Now, the most exact aspect that we can see in this moment is an opposition between the transiting Jupiter in Sagittarius opposing Hickok's natal Mercury in Gemini. When an opposition comes up, there's a balancing act to strike. This is the dynamic happening between Jupiter transiting its sign of rulership in Sagittarius and Mercury in rulership in Hickok's chart. Specifically, this was a balancing act related to communication and philosophies, how a message gets spread. They're also both retrograde, so it's likely a lot was left going unsaid, or what was said was being misconstrued. And Jupiter is a slower moving planet, so he would have been experiencing this buildup for a while, and this aspect actually exacted 2 days after the fatal shooting. The Gemini-Sagittarius axis also speaks to writing and publishing. I believe that this event played a huge role in how Hickok was able to establish himself as a cultural figure, because this is the moment that gave him his reputation as a deadly gunslinger, all because authors and journalists recounted this story and exaggerated it and published it and embedded him in popular culture. On this day in particular, we see Venus applying within 1 degree of his natal Chiron. Venus is also associated with fashion and how we decorate ourselves. So this points to an open nerve surrounding the topics of love or fashion, and we can say for sure that he had an exposed nerve about his beloved pocket watch. However, in conclusion, after looking at the charts at hand, I would be willing to bet that, again, women played a huge role in the buildup of this event. After the incident, Hickok continued his work in law enforcement, and he became infamous across the West as a killer, rumored to have killed over 100 men, although his alleged personal account of the subject was that he had only killed 36.